All right, before I start, can everyone hear me all over in the room? How about over here? Can you hear me? Wonderful, because I like to be able to walk around. As he introduced me, I was the first female member invited to join the PSF. Laura Creighton was there before me, but she was a member of a company that was a member of the PSF. So I was the first female invited to join the PSF. Just want to make that clarification because I don't want Laura to feel that I am ignoring her contributions to Python and to the PSF. So, what do you think of when you hear the word diversity? This is audience participation part. Speak up.
Documents by companies saying this is what we stand for.
Long documents by company saying we stand for this. What else? Ecosystem. Okay. Many types of life. Okay.
I think about women.
You think about women. Okay, you probably think about women a lot. But yeah. Okay, what else?
I think about Singapore.
Okay, this is a very diverse place. I'm really impressed with the multicultural city here. It's pretty awesome. So those are some things. What he brought up with the long document, a lot of us have gone through diversity training at corporations, companies, schools, and they're not always the most fun and exciting of training courses. The way that diversity is often presented isn't what I consider the best way to present it. Often it is framed as something to do with moral reasons. You should be diverse because you want to be a good person and thou shalt be diverse. Legal reasons. We don't want to get sued. We got to have this number of women in our company. Political and social reasons. We don't want somebody rioting because there aren't enough of that race or ethnicity, so we should do it for those reasons. Okay. Well, nobody wants to get sued, and that's a good reason. But, and we all want to think of ourselves as being tolerant and inclusive people. So that's good, but really what those come down to is guilt. And I'm not real fond of guilt. Now, guilt is often referred to as the great motivator. There was a study that found that guilt is kind of an internal self-punishment system to stop antisocial behavior. And it's a motivator to increase pro-social and repertory behavior. This is great, but in the rhetoric of diversity, people often are either laying guilt trips on others, threatening guilt to others, or trying to avoid guilt. And what it really comes down to is cognitive dissonance. In a lot of cases, you run into a conflict between your self-view, I'm a good person, and I feel guilty. When you have those two conflicting feelings, you have to resolve that conflict in some way. You could resolve it by changing your behavior and your attitudes and all of that, and that's great, and some people do try to do that, but because of the way diversity is presented, what really happens for a lot of people is resistance and rejection of the message. People say, it's been shoved down my throat, I don't care, I don't want to hear about it anymore, I just want to get back to coding. I don't care, it doesn't affect me, I want to get back to programming because this isn't about programming and this doesn't have anything to do with my life. So if we're not going to do guilt, what are we going to do? We're going to talk about the benefits of diversity, because what the question really is here at PyCon and at every training session that anybody ever goes to is there's a question. What's in it for me? Why should I care about this thing that I'm sitting through? And since we're at a Python conference, what's in it for Python? What does diversity have to do with programming? This is a question that needs to be addressed, and we're going to talk about it here. So we're going to review some studies, because I like studies. Studies actually go out and actually do more than just touchy-feely moral stuff. They actually look at how people behave and how people think. I like that. We're going to do a look at a diversity model. What does it mean to be diverse? And then I'll present some final thoughts, and we'll have a question and answer session. I'd like you to hold your questions until the end so that we can get through everything, and anyone who doesn't want to sit through it can run away. Okay, first study. In 1957, Robert K. Merton went to small town USA and said, who are the influencers in this small town? Who are the people who are the most influential? And the way that he divided people in that small town was into two groups, cosmopolitans and provincials. The provincials were subscribed to newspapers that were for their small town only. They were subscribed to magazines that were specific to their trade or their job, maybe the local agricultural review, something like that. The cosmopolitans were people who were subscribed to national magazines like Life, maybe The New Yorker, The New York Times, or maybe even The Economist, international magazines. So they were bringing in views from beyond the borders of the small town. What he found was that the cosmopolitans who were getting these views from outside the small town were the ones who were the most influential in that small town. Big corporations. Ronald S. Burt did this really huge network analysis of a big corporation with thousands of employees, and I think that's just such a pretty picture. I love network analysis graphs. They're just really cool looking. I'm a geek, sorry. So he looked at the clusters, he looked at the holes. These are all who's talking to who in this company. So the clusters are probably departments or maybe even teams, and the holes between the clusters, maybe you've got your information silos, departments that don't really talk to each other much, things like that. And so you've got this cutout here of one part of the network, and we're going to look at that. Okay? So what he wanted to know is, who's the most creative people in this company? Who are the people who have the most creative ideas? So we've got James here. James has an in-group. James talks to people in his in-group, probably people who are on his team, maybe people who are in his department. And then we've got Robert. Robert talks to people in his department, in his in-group, but he also talks to people across the structural holes, maybe people in a different team or even a different department. And so then, now that we've got it all mapped out, the graph of who talks to who's talking only within their in-group, who's going across structural holes. Now, how do we study who's most creative? What he did was he had a suggestion box, put in all your suggestions of your ideas, that things that the company should be doing, that the company could be doing. Bring us all your ideas. They collected all of these ideas, and then the high-level management were the judges of these ideas for creativity and for practicality. So they didn't want just pie in the sky, impossible dreams. They wanted to see stuff that could actually work in their company. And as you might suspect, the people who had the connections across the structural holes that were the most creative, had the most creative ideas in the company. Science. We all like science. Who here likes science? Yay, science. Science is cool. Science is in the business of solving difficult problems. And our programmers, we like to solve difficult problems, so that's a good thing. How do scientists solve difficult problems? Well, Isaac Asimov, one of my favorite science fiction authors, said that the most exciting phrase to hear in science, the one that heralds new discoveries, isn't "Eureka!" It's "That's funny." Scientists solve hard problems, and often it's by figuring out what happened when they got an unexpected result. They do their experiment, they have their hypothesis, they do an experiment to confirm or to disconfirm the hypothesis, so they get an unexpected result. What do they do in reaction to that? Individual scientists working alone often will say, well, okay, maybe I didn't control for a variable properly, or maybe something happened that I didn't think about properly, but often they'll just brush it aside and pass it off as something irrelevant. When scientists worked in lab groups, that's when they often would discuss these things in their lab group, these unexpected results, and try and figure out how to address them. One of the ways, the most common ways that they figured out how to address the unexpected results was with analogies. This is like that. This is like this thing that this other thing, and maybe we can think about it in this other way. Maybe we can come up with a conceptual change. Anybody know what that's a picture of? Yeah, Ouroboros. What's that got to do with science? The man should get a cookie. This scientist named Kekula had a dream about Ouroboros and discovered the structure of the benzene ring because of this dream. The analogy brought the conceptual change. Great, we've got a conceptual change, we've got analogies, but all of the labs used this to what's the difference between the lab groups that were successful and the ones that weren't. What he found out was that the lab groups that had people with different pools of knowledge were the ones to draw from for their analogies, were the ones that were more successful. So instead of a bunch of biologists all together, a biologist and a chemist and a physicist, perhaps, or people from other fields, or at least who had had other experiences, other pools of knowledge to draw from, were more successful than a group of homogeneous people who had all studied at the same university, all worked together forever, all gotten the same training. So, to review, these are a small sampling of classic studies that all point toward the same direction, which is that interactions among individuals with differing perspectives, skill sets, needs, and motivations generates innovation and creativity. This generation of innovation and creativity is more than just what the individuals can accomplish on their own. It's benefits that extend beyond the individuals. We're going to look at that a bit more, those kinds of diversity that we just pinpointed there. Needs and motivations, skill sets, perspectives. These are the kinds of diversity that I'm talking about that generate innovation and creativity. Now, what you don't see up there is gender. You don't see ethnicity. You don't see race. You don't see all of the other usual kinds of diversity stuff, the identity stuff that usually gets brought up when you're talking about diversity in diversity training, or when you're talking about, oh, we have to increase diversity in our group. And there's a reason for that. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but those are proxies actually for this stuff. So when we're talking about what's in it for me, when we're talking about diversity in terms of how does that improve Python, how does that improve my project, these are the kinds of diversity that really matter. So how many people here have contributed to Python? How many people here have done any of these things? A lot more hands. How many people here have actually attended a conference and talked to other people about Python and how you're using it? Now, come on, you're all here at this conference. I know you've done this. That is contributing to Python. These are all ways to contribute to Python. Even if you went to a Python expert core committer and said, you know, this really sucks. Fix this, and I don't know how, but this really sucks. That's contributing, because then they know that that needs to get fixed, okay? So there's a lot of ways to contribute to Python. Why are you contributing to Python? Why are you here? You are scratching an itch. People in open source aren't here because we're getting paid to, although some few individuals get to actually be here because their corporation pays them. But in open source, people generally are doing it because they have an itch to be scratched. And we all have a different itch to be scratched. We all have different needs and motivations and wants, different things that we want out of Python. My name is perfectly easy to put in Python without having to resort to Unicode. In ASCII, I don't have any special characters in my name. Someone else who has a name with characters that aren't in ASCII really wants Python to have Unicode. And so those are differences between our needs, and one of the reasons that Python actually has Unicode support now, and there's been a focus on internationalization because of the different needs of the people who use Python. Now, one thing that gets brought up when we talk about diversity and, you know, addressing different needs is wondering whether or not we're just catering to special interest groups. Okay, we want to get more women. Well, okay, that's great for the women, but what's that do for me? What's that do for everyone else who's already here? So there's a concept called universal design. How many people here traveled to get to this conference? Okay. How many of you have rolly bags with wheels? Okay. And when you walked along the sidewalk, you used the sidewalk, the curb cut in the sidewalk there for your rolly bag. Now you know that those curb cuts were not created for you to use your rolly bag, your luggage. They were created for people in wheelchairs. What they ended up doing was benefiting us, those of us who travel with our rolly luggage, and people who have strollers, and people who have bicycles, and all sorts of other people with grocery carts, all sorts of people got a benefit from catering to a special need of people in wheelchairs. Text-to-speech. How many people here have Kindles? Not so many here. Okay, a couple. My Kindle can't, when I'm in the good part of a book, but I have to do the laundry or I have to go get in the car and drive somewhere, I can't keep reading, but I can turn on text-to-speech and continue with that good part of that book. It wasn't created for me to be able to do that. It was created for people who were sight impaired, but it benefits me. Subtitles and captions. I'm sure everyone in this room has used this at some point. It wasn't created to make everybody's lives better. It was created to address a specific need. Large print, changeable fonts on websites. Being able to increase the font on a website is really nice for people with sight impairment. It's also really helpful for elderly people, and I know you're all young and think you'll be young forever. You're not. Someday you'll have old eyes like me, and you'll need the larger font, and that larger font that was created, the ability to change your fonts that you did for accessibility reasons is going to benefit you. So there's a lot of reasons, things out there that we use every day that benefit us, that were created for dealing with accessibility, for dealing with addressing a specific need. But what's that got to do with us? Okay, we all like community or we wouldn't be here. We'd all be, if we didn't like community, we would be sitting in our basement programming right now. So we're here, we like community, we like user groups that are functional, that we can get together with people and learn more from each other. Boston has a user group, had about 700 people in it, and said, well, we've only got 1 or 2% of women in our user group. And we want to change that because the women were feeling kind of outnumbered, and they wanted to fix that. So they started having workshops to teach Python to women who didn't know Python. Either they were Perl programmers, poor things. Sorry. What's that? Yes, they are, and I've actually got a quote from a Perl programmer in my slides. So they were either programmers in another language, or they were non-programmers entirely who were learning programming for the first time. So they created these workshops. And they got to their 15% women in their target goal, which, and after like a couple, 3 workshops, great. So their community grew by 15%, right? Their community more than doubled. And it wasn't just more women, it wasn't just more coders. They had more scientists, more entrepreneurs, more musicians, more artists, more every kind of person who could use Python as a result of these workshops that were oriented toward women. Their focus to try to increase diversity worked wonders for them. They now have things going on every night of the week, all year long. Their community is incredibly vibrant. So you don't care about community? Do you care about money? Singapore seems to care a lot about money, I've noticed. It gets mentioned a lot on the tour buses and the duck tour. So I figure some people here might care about money. Well, women on the board of directors brings you financial success. There was a recent study of Fortune 500 companies in the US, and the ones with the most women on the board of directors outperformed those with less women on the board of directors by around 50%. Those with at least 3 women outperformed everyone. And that was across all sectors and by all measures: return on equity, return on sales, return on invested capital. And I've noticed in the paper here that your board of directors are getting revamped, that you need more independent boards, independent board members. And there's, excuse me one. There's a big focus on increasing ethnic and gender diversity in the boards here in Singapore. I think that's because they recognize that it will make them more money. So that's different needs and wants and motivations. Let's talk about differing skill sets. Now, one of the things people think of when they think about diversity is, I've got a quota, I've got these 2 candidates, I've got this one person who's an awesome programmer, I want to hire him, but I have to hire this woman who's, well, she's not as good a programmer, and I have to hire her for the sake of diversity for my quota. Now, not everyone comes to Python with the same skill set. Not everyone on a soccer team has the same skill set. Now, if you're wondering why I've got Italian soccer team up here, it's from the 2006 World Cup, and I'm married to an Italian. So on a soccer team, you need defenders, you need attackers, you need goalies. They have different skill sets. They're all great soccer players, but they have very different skill sets that make them great at what they do. Programmers don't have the same skill set. There are a range of skills that make a great programmer. One person might be great programmer and great at documentation. Another person might be great at debugging. There's differences in those skill sets, and if you're only looking for one limited kind of skill set that's just like yours, you're not going to get the diversity that you need in order to improve your project. So we all have different skills that we brought to Python. Not everybody can wade through legalese. We have Van Lindbergh is a Pythonista who's on the PSF, who's a lawyer, and he advises us on things like intellectual property, on trademark patents, things like that, and we need that. Now, if you were hiring him for a project, you might only focus on his programming and miss the fact that he's got all these other skills that would be really helpful to have. We need people who can organize conferences. Thank you. Thank you. Let's give a round of applause to all the people who worked on organizing this conference. That's an amazing skill set. Being able to organize a conference is awesome. It's a lot of work, so keep those things in mind. Someone who knows design, someone who knows how to do human-computer interface, those are skill sets that we need. Now, perspectives. We all come to Python with unique backgrounds and perspectives. And this is where those identity sort of diversity issues come in, the gender and ethnicity and all of that kind of thing, because those identity diversities are proxies for different perspectives. Now, problem solving. When I first started programming, Alex Martelli told me that programming is for people who love problem solving because there's always so many problems to solve. And I happen to like problem solving, so programming is a good place for me. But we all approach problems in a different way. We may see different problems and different solutions. And we have different skills to resolve those. Now, as individuals, some of us might be geniuses. Some of us might not. But as groups, as collective intelligence, we can solve problems much better, like we saw in the lab groups that we looked at. But there's a barrier to collective intelligence, to working together as a group, and that's groupthink and conformity. And we all think, oh, we are all individuals. I am not going to fall subject to groupthink. I am not going to conform. I'm a geek and I'm proud of it. I'm not like anybody else. Homogeneity increases groupthink. And groupthink and conformity is a lot more widespread than people like to think. Why? We have lazy brains. Our brains want to reduce cognitive load so that they can kind of hang out on the hammock sipping Singapore slings and not doing any work because they're lazy. Our lazy brains use heuristics and rely on that to do all of its work, pretty much. And then we kind of force it to think, but it doesn't want to. What it wants to do is automatic pattern completion. It sees something and says, oh, this is like that. Oh, hey, that has 4 legs and a surface, so it must be a table. That has 4 legs and a surface and a back, so it must be a chair. That's pattern completion. It looks at it, compares it to what's already stored as a prototype, and says, okay, this is one of those. And it does it based on obvious attributes, obvious surface similarity. The other thing that our brains do is relies on availability. The easiest memory to access, the easiest pattern to complete is the one that's going to happen. That's the one that's going to happen in a blink of an eye, subconsciously, before you even think about it. Things like primacy and recency, the first thing you heard, the most recent thing you heard, those are strong in your connections of your brain, and those are the things that your brain's going to access. Things you've heard a lot. That's what advertisers rely on. You heard this over and over and over again, this particular brand of laundry soap, and so when you go and you have a bunch of laundry soap in front of you at the grocery store and you're in a hurry, what do you grab? The one that you've heard of over and over and over again, because that's the strongest association in your brain. This can lead to some unsettling effects as individuals. When we're interacting with others, it can lead to stereotypes. Stereotypes come up because it's a strong association. When I see a chair, I think about chairs and all the other associations I have with chairs or tables. I see a podium and I think it automatically completes not just a podium, but all of the other associations I have. If I see a hairy leg of an animal without seeing the rest of the animal, if I was bitten by a dog in the past, I might feel fear because I see that leg. It completes as, okay, it's probably a dog, and I'm scared because I was bitten by that dog, regardless of whether it was a nice dog or a little, fluffy, sweetest dog ever. I might be scared of it because of those associations that automatically happen. That's because my brain is lazy. Anchoring. Anchoring is a really cool effect, but it can get us in trouble. If I ask you, is the percentage of African countries in the UN more or less than 10%? Less? Okay. And you. Is the percentage of African countries in the UN more or less than 65%? Okay, I'll ask. Is the percentage of African countries in the United Nations more or less than 65%? Either of you. More or less? Okay, less. Okay. Now, what percentage of African nations are there in the United Nations? Estimate. Just an estimate, off the cuff. First number that comes to mind.
25?
Okay, 25. Thank you. Over here, give me a number. What percentage? 50? Great. You guys are showing the classic pattern of anchoring, which is that those individuals who were asked about it being more or less than 10% averaged around 25% for their guesstimate. Those who were asked whether it was more or less than 65% averaged actually about 45% for their guess, but 50 is about the same range. That's because of anchoring, because of the low number or the high number anchored your answers to being more similar to that. It happens all the time. It's not just with numbers, it's with focusing on any specific kind of issue, and it happens with brainstorming. Someone comes up with an idea and you all anchor around that idea before you've had a chance to explore other ideas, other ways of looking at a process. False consensus effect. How do you feel about the sticker lady? Do you guys know about the sticker lady here who's been putting stickers on the okay? So if you ask a bunch of people if you ask an individual how do they feel about, what do they think about, how do you think other people will feel about the sticker lady? Then the most strong connection you have is, what do you think about the sticker lady? And so what happens is, you say, what I think about the sticker lady is how everyone will think about the sticker lady, or at least everyone like me. And this is false consensus effect. It means that you think everyone will think like you, or at least everyone who's like you will think like you. All right-minded people will think this way about the sticker lady. So, but we're not individuals in a vacuum. We are social animals. We interact with other people, and this has effects on us and how we perceive and how we behave. The bystander effect came about, it was named after an incident in the United States in New York. Kitty Genovese was a woman, young woman, who was stabbed to death in the courtyard of an apartment building with everyone looking down, horrified at this, but nobody doing anything. Why didn't they do anything? What's wrong with these people? Why didn't someone do something? Well, the problem is that the more people, the more bystanders you've got around an incident, around an accident, for example, the less likely it is that anybody will actually do anything. People base their actions on what other people are doing and don't realize that those other people are doing the same thing. So we use other people's behavior in order to, we use that as cues for the way we should behave, the way we should interpret things. So which line here matches the line on the left there? Which one on the, which of A, B, or C, which matches it? C, obviously. I mean, it's a simple question. Okay, now, you are my subject, and you guys, I want to answer A, okay? So which line matches the one on the left? Say A. You're working on my side, okay? Just say A. A? Okay. And you, which line matches the one on the left? You're not my confederate. You're the subject. He said A. Now, he knows that A is not the right answer here. He's going along with it so that he doesn't rock the boat, so that he doesn't screw up the experiment. And in fact, when they did trials, when people were on their own, 100% got the right answer because there were obvious answers. But after that, they stuck them in a room with a bunch of other people who were confederates working with the experimenter and got 32% incorrect responses on these simple perceptual things, and 75% of participants caved at least once. Okay? We all do this. It's not him, it's everybody does this in some situations. And if you tell me you don't, when's the last time that you didn't wear the right clothing when you went to visit your grandmother? Okay, what affected this? What influences the conforming to what everyone around you is doing? Group size. You're thinking, well, what's the group size that matters? If there's 4 other people saying this thing, the chances that the person will conform are 75%. It only takes 4 other people. So if you have a small team and you think, oh, we won't have this problem. If you've got a team of 5 people, you're going to have this problem. Now, how did they avoid it? Anonymity. If people wrote their answer, no problem. Everybody wrote their answer, and so there wasn't any pressure to conform. Unanimity. Everyone here said A. Now, if this person here had said C, there would be a dissenter. A dissenter breaks the pattern and breaks the pressure to conform. And so if you have at least one person in that group dissenting, the subject gave the right answer all the time, or almost all the time. So, next slide, I want you to watch the light. Now, if this was a totally dark room, that light would appear to move. It's called the Autokinetic Effect. A single point of light in a completely dark room looks like it's moving. So what the experimenters would do is they'd stick someone in the room and they would say, okay, I want you to watch this light, and then when we turn the lights on, tell me how far it moved. And this person over here would say 2 inches. Say 2 inches.
2 inches.
Awesome. And Beng over here would say 6 inches, or 5 inches. No, 5 inches. Beng? 5 inches. Okay, great. So pretty soon after a few of these trials, he would always say 2 inches, he would always say 5 inches. So it kind of converged to decide. Now this is an effect that's in your head. The light isn't moving. This is just a perceptual trick that your brain does to you when you're in a dark room and you have a single point of light. It's not actually moving, but your brain thinks it is. So you settle on a distance, and then we get you guys in a group. And you get everybody else in the group. In your group, everybody else is saying 6 inches. What's his response going to do? His response is going to move to 4 inches. In Beng's group, everybody's saying, oh, it's 1 inch. And Beng's answer is going to move to 3 inches. And the coolest thing, well, okay, the almost coolest thing is that afterwards they would say, well, no, I wasn't influenced by the other people. And when we put them into individual trials again afterwards, they would hold to their 4-inch and 3-inch changed response. Their perception has been changed, has been influenced by being in a group that had a different answer, and it was maintained over time. Now, okay, people can say anything they want about perception. They can claim, but what about their actual behavior? So, there's something called the smoke-filled room experiment. So, let's hide that. We got you in a smoke-filled room, in a room filling out a survey. Smoke starts to come into the room. What are you going to do? Yeah, come and tell the experimenter, there's smoke pouring into this room. This is a problem. So, yeah, I mean, people are going to do that. You get 3 or more people in a group in the room, and they're not going to get up. They're going to look at each other and go back to filling out their survey because nobody else is getting up, so it must be okay. This is part of it is diffusion of responsibility. Somebody else will help. Somebody else will notice and get up and do it. I don't want to look stupid. I mean, I don't want to be the one causing problems here. And is this even a problem? If we use other people as a cue to interpreting our environment. Now, if you hear a sound in the forest, in the jungle, and you're a caveman, and everybody else runs, and you don't run, and the tiger eats you, you're not going to, pass on your genes. And everybody else is going to say, that idiot should have ran. So we are evolved to use other people in our group as cues to interpreting whether this is a problem. If you hear a sound and everybody else says, no problem, you're going to assume it's no problem. But we don't realize it. We don't realize that our decisions, our judgments, our perceptions are the product of these heuristics, these lazy brains, and these social interactions. And everybody else's is too. We don't realize it. And this can cause us problems. So how do you overcome heuristic like stereotyping? A couple things that help are if you are getting a resume, don't have any identifying characteristics, don't put the name on it. Look at the resume without the name on it, so you don't know what gender the person is, you don't know what ethnicity they are. All you know about them is what you see on the resume. Another thing that they've found is orchestra players. Orchestras were having trouble with diversity. They didn't have enough women, they didn't have enough minorities. What did they do? For their auditions, they put up a screen between the people doing the judging and the people who were auditioning. And when they didn't have the cues for the automatic pattern recognition, all they relied on was the actual performance, and their hiring of women and of minorities doubled overnight because of this change. So their perception of that person's skill changed as a result of taking out the stereotype associations. Now, how do we overcome groupthink and conformity? Diversity. Surface level diversity traits. Now, I said that these surface level things like gender and ethnicity don't matter as much as the other things. Well, in this one way, they do matter. Surface level diversity, cuts through that automatic pattern completion that leads to false consensus. This person isn't like me. Therefore, I don't assume that they will think like me. So it triggers the expectation that they will have different views. They're a dissenter. I don't have to conform. I can state my views. I won't anchor on the first answer that comes up, the first idea that comes up, so I can take advantage of all those other things that we talked about, the different needs, motivations, skill sets, and perspectives, without falling into the trap of groupthink. So diversity matters to us, to our projects, to Python, to our work, not just for the moral and political reasons, but for very pragmatic reasons, very practical reasons. Those different needs and motivations and skill sets and perspectives and the cues associated with diversity breaks the groupthink, generates innovation and creative problem solving, and that leads to better software. Now, Python is already the best programming language, right? Yay, Python. But it's not the best programming language it could be yet. For it to be the best, diversity is necessary, but not sufficient. Diversity is hard. You can't just grab a bunch of diverse people, stick them in a room, and expect miracles. You can't even expect them to get along, okay? You have all sorts of differences causing friction, problems communicating, people with different language barriers or even with the same language who don't have the same goals and priorities. Valuing those other perspectives and skill sets, geeks have a real hard time valuing some of those other skill sets and perspectives, and that's something that we need to work on. Yes, we do actually need people who think about human-computer interface and design and some of these other things that we kind of tack on at the end. Yes. So how do we do it? How do we make it actually work for us? Education, talking about it in places like this. Facilitating communication, getting someone who knows that if you get a bunch of people together to brainstorm, one way to avoid groupthink is to have them think about the problem first, write down some ideas, and come in with those ideas so that you don't all go off down down the garden path that leads you into the dungeon. Clear process and goal setting. You don't want to find out at the end of all of the hiring committee that, oh, by the way, you have to hire the woman. What? No. Think about how you're hiring and what you're trying to accomplish before you start the whole process of putting out the request for someone to come and work on your team. Clear decision making. We're lucky in Python. We got the BDFL. We've got the PEP process. So that works pretty good. And a willingness to work on it. Programming is hard. I mean, think about it. You say you want to create an app that works across multiple platforms, works on BlackBerries and iPhones and iPads and all the different versions of Android and maybe even my MacBook Air, and it's a pain in the neck. And that's when you've got SDKs and APIs and docs and specs and help forums and books and design patterns and all of these things working for you. It's still hard. Well, you know what? People are harder. Every person in this room, every person you ever meet has a different OS, a different chipset, a different browser, a different platform. None of us come with docs. So when you hear people talking about diversity, creating a diversity statement or getting together a forum to, a mailing list to talk about diversity. What they're really trying to do is create docs for working with people. So kind of think about it that way, and it might help you to understand why they're wasting their time on that. In conclusion, I hope that I've helped you understand why I feel that the future of Python really depends on diversity, because without diversity, we aren't going to get the best Python that we possibly can. And Damian Conway is a Perl programmer, and so I even have a Perl programmer on my slides. And I'm done. He's also an awesome presenter. If you ever get a chance to see him present, definitely go to it. Yes?
So when you look at someone's resume and then you blindfold yourself whether he or she, it's a good thing. Same with any program, patches or college or anything. You don't have to look at what gender or what particular nationality or anything.
I actually understood you better without the microphone. Sorry. I wear a hearing aid and it's outnumbered by the echoes.
Yeah. So if we term that as diversity, we can see it as an ethics, okay? It's a good thing, it's an ethical thing to do. You shouldn't judge someone by something.
Right, that's the moral reasons.
Yeah, that is, okay, I see it like that way.
Okay.
But something where a person is running a workshop exclusively for women or trying more to bring more women into programming community and then terming it as diversity into programming community, I'm trying to understand that, it's like exclusivity then, it's not diversity.
Right.
Diversity.
One of the things that the Boston workshops did was they were oriented to women, they were focused on women, but they weren't exclusive to women. But also those women, once they got in the community, they brought their friends, and some of their friends were not geeks. Were not programmers. So they brought other people in, even if the places where it was exclusive women, the women had other contacts that they brought in because they saw that it was open to lots of other kinds of people. And so that did help improve it.
Benefit. But isn't it ethically wrong to just specify to give a training to women, because you are saying that we don't have enough women in our community. So we are doing some practical measures to bring it. But isn't it contradictory to the first statement that we should not look at the gender and give the correct information?
The thing is, if you want to increase, women in IT is a hugely complex problem. I once did a talk on it, and one of my sources was an encyclopedia of women in technology that was 1,400 pages long each volume, and about that thick, about that big. I know I carried it home on my bicycle. There's so many studies on why there aren't enough women in technology and IT, and so focusing on women in some cases can be really helpful to address those issues. And I'm happy to talk with you afterwards about what some of those issues are. But one of the things that I think it was MIT, no, it was Carnegie Mellon, did that they wanted to increase the retention of women in their computer science course, in their computer science bachelor's program. Women were dropping out within the first year. What they did in order to do this was, one of the things they said, self-identify how technically savvy you are. How good of a programmer are you already? And then set up classes that were focused on people who identified as, I'm already a wizard, and I'm a newbie or not very confident about my programming ability. The first year, they ran 2 tracks. At the end of that first year, not only had they increased retention of women, they had also increased retention of other people who had been also dropping out, people like artists and musicians and other people that weren't the classic geek stereotype. And at the end of that year, the second year, they were all on the same level and were taking the same classes, and it improved the problem that they ran into was that the wizards were getting all the attention from the teachers were talking to the wizards, and the other people were feeling like, well, do I really belong here? Maybe I'm not smart enough, maybe I'm not able to keep up. And it wasn't that, it was that they were feeling outclassed by the wizards and they weren't getting the attention that they needed in the classroom. I saw this myself in a C programming class. There was supposed to be an intro, and the teacher, the people who were already programmers were getting all of the attention, and I kept raising my hand and saying, no, this is an intro to programming class. Talk to the people here who are newbies to programming. Explain it to them, because they're the ones who need to have this information, and it's an easy mistake to make as an instructor, to talk to the people who ask the cool questions because they know so much, and these other people don't even know enough to ask good questions because they have no clue what you're talking about. So it's complex, but I don't believe in having exclusively women as a class necessarily, but focused on women is very helpful. On the other hand, there's also a Grace Hopper Celebration of Women in Computing. Again, it's not exclusive. Men can attend, but it's focused on women. It's 3,000 women programmers, coders, engineers, and it's an awesome experience to be a woman at a programming conference and to actually have to wait for the bathroom. This is a new experience for me, to be at a programming conference with 3,000 other women and to see that I'm not alone. I'm not the only woman who likes to program. And that makes a difference in how I feel after I get out of there, and it makes a difference in how women feel when they get back to their jobs when they're surrounded by all guys in many cases. So there's a lot of women programmers. They're just not as visible for a lot of reasons, and there's not enough. But there's also not enough diversity of a variety of kinds of diversity. In the US, there's too much homogeneity of Caucasian, whites. There's not enough African Americans who are programming. We need to increase that, and there's a focus on trying to increase that kind of diversity. So it depends on your area, where you work, what kind of diversity you need to increase. And so focusing on trying to increase that will help your project and your community. Because those people will say, oh, there's more kinds of people here, and bring in their friends that you may never have met. If nothing else, that's one way it works. Other questions? Yes?
Yeah, I want to focus on the bigger picture, not from the community point of view, but the societal point of view, from the society point of view. Because diversity doesn't appear as an each for majority to me. We're talking about
Right.
eaches. And I think that it's a majority which is dictating these stereotypes. So these local actions, like in a small community, you want to fix the problem. It's good for the community, but not for the society as a whole, right?
I'm sorry, what's not good for society?
A local fix of diversity doesn't fix the whole society.
No, but eventually it starts to, you get a lot of local action, and that starts improving society in general. You also need top-down work, but governments are working on it. You know, so you're getting top-down from governments and from, you know, the schools, and all of them are working on it already. They've been studying it forever, believe me. It was one of the millennial goals of the United Nations. They've been working on it forever. The top-down societal level, they're working on it, the infrastructure. They're not solving it. What we need is work from the bottom up, from those of us who are working together on open source, on these projects, on together to work on it from the ground level, so that the grassroots, so that we can help to get it through and to get it furthered.
So you think you can make the majority care about diversity by doing like that?
I think that when they see the results that we're getting, they'll say, how do you do that? Look at the Fortune 500 companies. They're getting good results, and it's spreading. And people care for different reasons. Some people care just because it makes them more money. Okay, that works. That's a perfectly good motivation. If you care because it makes your company more money, great. Then you'll try and do it for that reason. If you care because you want to have a more innovative product, then do it for that reason. But there's a lot of, what I mostly want to get out is the message that there's benefits to it besides just feeling good about yourself. It's also pragmatic, practical, improved creativity, improved innovation. You will make better products if you have a more diverse group in your product development.
That's a double-edged sword, because the day it's not true is the day they will exclude people who it's not fair to exclude.
I'm sorry, what?
That's a double-edged sword.
Okay, in what way?
The day it's not true, the day it appears that they observe that something, diversity, doesn't help some specific thing, then they're going to move away from it.
It's not a short-term fix. It's not the only thing that makes your products good.
Yeah.
But it's one thing that helps. So. Okay.
Those who need the buses should be here at 6:15.
And I'm taking the bus, so. Yeah.
Thank you for that talk. I was going to just throw out an idea. So I read Wikinomics a few years ago, and an example from that it triggered in my memory from what you gave as your little demo for guessing a certain number. And the example in that was a bean, a jar of jelly beans, and counting the number of beans in it. And the most accurate estimate of the number of beans was obtained by averaging that from the broad number of beans.
Yes.
So yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, you're right. That's the collective intelligence idea, that all of us are smarter than any one of us, but that only works if they're not talking to each other. That the example he gave is from a book where there was a jar of jelly beans. Guess how many jelly beans are in the jar? People gave lots of different guesstimates. Averaging those estimates actually got closer to being accurate to the number of jelly beans in the jar. But it doesn't work if those people are talking to each other before they make their estimate. That throws it off. That's because of the groupthink and conformity. It throws off the, they're better at estimating than I am, or just their number, they do the first number and I anchor on that number. Things like that throw it off. So yeah, there's a whole lot of stuff out there about how we can be more intelligent and do better stuff as a group, but we have to avoid the groupthink. So, I think we need to go catch the bus.
Right. Everyone.